Okay, boys, listen to me. Pedig Beis, and I told you this yesterday already, that the Rebbe, when the Frierdiker Rebbe, when he made the Chitas, doesn't want to divide Pedig Beis in half. The whole Pedig Beis is one shiur in a regular year, Chav Dalet Kislev, and it's one shiur in a leap year, Chavav Kislev. Everything else gets chopped up. Pedig Gimel is tiny, it's 2 days. Pedig Beis is huge, it's 1 day. And my own humble opinion for why this is because since Pedig Beis talks about the Etzem HaNeshama, the Yechidish HaBenefesh, the Etzem HaNeshama is indivisible. So Neshama is a Yenatzmi. So that's why it goes like this. This is my Hergish. But of course, you know what Hergishim are worth. Now, again, as you know, the Alter Rebbe is talking about the Benyani B'Shem HaToyar as opposed to the Benyani B'Shem HaMoshel. Correct? In order to explain the Benyani B'Shem HaToyar, he starts to talk about a person. In talking about a person, he says you should know a person consists of two nefashis. Shehein shtei nefashis. The two souls, shehein shtei nefashis. What are these two souls? Nefesh HaBahamis and Nefesh HaLakis. And we talked about this yesterday. Nefesh HaBahamis doesn't necessarily have to be bad, especially by a Yid. The Nefesh HaBahamis simply has to be selfish. And the three characteristics of Nefesh HaBahamis we talked about were selfish, short-sighted, not reich and and worry. That's the human third component. By a Yid, Nefesh Udeklipa Yesh Bagam Kein Toiv, I talked to you yesterday about this. This doesn't mean that it could do good things. It could do good things altruistically without any anticipation of return, of getting anything back in return.
It's a good thing.
It's a gavaldik thing. Goyim also do charity, but altruism is unique to the Nefesh HaBahamis of a Yid. Wegen the Nefesh HaLakis redt man nicht. So Pedig Beis begins talking about the Nefesh HaShenis B'Yisrael, the second soul in Yidden. He chelik alakah mimal, as a piece of alakah mimal from above mamash. But because of what the Pasuk says, "Vayipach ba'apaf nishmas chayim," that we learn by Avraham, by other Merishim, the Eibishter blew into his nostrils a breath of life. Salkadai techamina, it was only Avraham Avinu, other Merishim. So he brings a siddur va'ata nafachta bi, and you blew into me. This is from Alakai Neshama, that not just other Merishim, but every Jew Hashem blows a soul into him. So Hashem blows a soul, big deal. Meshkasa says. When one blows, they blow from their innermost parts. Pirush, this means when one blows, it's from his innermost parts and his deepest most parts. The inner dimension and deepest dimension of the life of a person, he brings forward. But when he blows with power, similarly, when the Eibishter creates a neshama, by blowing, he's blowing kvayachol, the pnimius va'atzmos of alakus is being blown into the other person. Okay? And of course, the deal here is that a neshama is a piece of the Eibishter. The same is true also by way of analogy. That neshama is Yisrael, the Jewish souls went up on Hashem's thought. Kediksiv, and he brings rayas. Right? He just brought a raya that every Jew is a piece of Hashem. And the pasuk was he blew. Now he's bringing a raya that every Jew comes from Hashem's thought. And he brings the pasuk Kediksiv, as it's written, B'ni b'chedi Yisrael, my son, my firstborn Yisrael. And we are Hashem's children. These are two psukim. One is in Pasha Shmeis, one is in Pasha Re'eh. Peter just means to say, just like a son, comes from the brain of his father. So too similarly, Nishmas Kolish Yisrael, the soul of every single Jew, comes from the thought. Sorry?
Why do you say Kaviyachal?
Because nothing by the Eibishter is literal. Comes from the thought and the wisdom of the Eibishter. Stop. There's 2 points that are being made here and they're distinct. The first point is that he is a chelik l'kamim ma'amamish. And the second point is that he comes from the Eibishter's machshava, which is chochmei law. It's not the same thing. Chelik l'kamim ma'amamish we call euphemistically atzmos. Machshava is chochmei law, which is in Seder Shtashos. And of course the teretz is that the neshama's real shadish is atzmos mus mamish. But the way it's nimshach in Shtashos, it comes from machshava. Most creations come from dibur. Or at least they come from machshava in a way that when it comes into dibur it's going to change. And the neshama comes from deep, from machshava, and even the way it comes from mata, it continues to come from machshava. The lashon that my modem is mebechinas el yeinei shala machshava. A Yiddish neshama comes from the highest madrega of machshava. And he brings it out from children. Children come from the father's brain. And it doesn't just mean the seichel of the brain. It means that in the brain of the father you have the etzem of the father. Similarly, a Yid comes, so to speak, from the etzem of atzmus amos ein sof baruch. So these 2 points, that a Yid is a chelik kamim al mamish, and that a Yid comes from chochmei law, from the brain of the Eibishter, in other words, from the deepest madreg of the brain, kvayachol. One is the truth, and the other way it comes down in hishtalshalos. Okay, so I would say that the word kvayachal doesn't go on the word nimshach, but it goes on the word mayach. It's like a chelik mamish. But when you say from the mayach of the Eibishter, that's a kvayachal, because the Eibishter doesn't have a mayach. And he continues to talk about the Hashem's chokhmah, and he says, the Eibishter created a hishtashlus, and in hishtashlus there's a iyam from Atzilus, and Atzilus is a iyam from chokhmah. In chokhmah there's the highest madreg of chokhmah, and from this highest madreg of chokhmah, Yiddish and neshama comes. Says the Alter Rebbe, the Yuchakim, that Hashem is wise, but his wisdom is not known. That we cannot understand what it means by Hashem's chokhmah, because Elohu v'chachmas yechad, Hashem and his chokhmah are one. In the words of the Rambam, Shehu ha'mada, V'hu ha'yedeya v'chol Hashem is the knowledge, the knower and the known, etc. And the Rambam explains himself, V'davas and this idea, Ein b'yachayla sa'adam, it's not possible for a person, Lavin e'al b'uriyeh b'chudi, to understand it properly. As the pasuk says, if you will search Hashem, will you then find Him? Question mark. Uksiv says another pasuk, Hashem is totally different than our own thought. The Rambam has a kasha. It's a famous kasha which is discussed by Arichas and Sharichas in the Perek Zayin. And the kasha is, how could Hashem know what's happening in this world? The reason that's a kasha is because since the world changes, and Hashem knows what's happening in the world, that means that Hashem has to change. If Hashem changes by knowing what's happening in this world, that means the Sheni and the Eibishter, and the Eibishter is not allowed to change. And the Rambam's solution to this kasha is b'yediyas atzma yedeya. Hu yedeya and hu yedeya. Hashem is the knower, the tool of knowledge, the kli of yediyah, and the yadua, the knowledge itself. So the Alter Rebbe brings that ayah from this Rambam, that a yid is one with Hashem even after the Eibishter created him. Because if a yid is separate from the Eibishter, then there's everything is it. Hu yedeya, this is the Rambam. But this Rambam says that this idea that three is mamish one, that the knower and the tool of knowledge and the known are one, is impossible to understand. So when you talk about the Eibishter's chokhmah, it's not that he's smarter than us. It's a different echos of chokhmah b'chlal, because by us, as smart as we are, there's two things. There's the chokhmah, and there's the chokhmah, and there's the chakmus. There's what you're creating through your chokhmah. By the Eibishter, all those three are one. When you say Yisrael all of machshava, Yidden come from Hashem's chokhmah, from the deepest madrega. The lashon is madrega al yeinish machshava, from the highest madrega of the Eibishter's chokhmah, from the highest machshava. You got to admit that you can't understand what that means. So even though we don't understand what it means, one thing we know for sure: a Yid is mushish in this madrega of chokhmah law, which is the same thing as saying a Yid is a chelik al kamim al mamish, as you would shtel the dois, as you would manifest it in the frame of a Seder Eshtashlis. In Seder Eshtashlis, where is the atzma of the Eibishter in chokhmah? So the first thing is a chelik al kamim al mamish. Then he puts two dots. The second is that this chelik al kamim al mamish goes through a Eshtashlis like everything else. Where in Eshtashlis does the chelik al kamim al mamish manifest? So there should be nimshach lamata exactly the way it is lamayla in chokhmah. Now this Hagah. This Hagah goes on the Rambam. It's not negated in the Shomis, it's negated the Rambam. The Rambam says that the Eibishter is the day you do in your mother. Why does the Rambam say this? Now, I don't want to go into the Arichas, but the Kitzur is. The Rambam says this because the Rambam is a Chayk Yisrael, Kvayach, officially. Right? The word Kvayach is because the Rambam was really not a Chayk Yisrael. But he writes like Chayk Yisrael. Chayk Yisrael had a Medida v'Hagbal, had a Atzmizdik Hagbal. Because they said, the Chayk Yisrael said that the truth of everything is Seichel. That we discussed last night. They said that the Eibishter himself is Seichel. There's nothing higher than Seichel. Hashem himself is Seichel. But then, he's smarter than us. He's a lot smarter than us. How much smarter than us is he? Who are you doing? Are you doing? Who am I? But the bottom line is that Rambam says that the Eibishter is an etzem of Seichel. And he says he can't understand what this means, but nevertheless, we're not saying that there's an inyan from Nimna and Nimnois. We're not saying by the Eibishter Lamayla Menasech. Says the Rebbe Nagova, Heidu lechach mi Kabbalah. Kabbalah agrees with this Rambam, that the Eibishter is the etzem of Seichel. Michikos about his man Ramak is written in the Kabbalah of the Ramak. Even according to Arizal, this is also true. Besaid, based on the mystical secret of his slapjas that Ein Sof Baruch Hu, the manifestation of the Ein Sof, Ayedei Tzimtzumim Rabim, through many Tzimtzumim, Bekelim Techabad Atzilos, in the vessel of Chabad Atzilos. What's the diak of Gamle Fi Kabbalah Arizal? I'm not sure, but I think the diak is because Arizal held from Tzimtzum Arishan. The Padas didn't know from Tzimtzum Arishan, so by the Padas everything is Ishtashalos. Since the Arizal holds from Tzimtzum Arishan, and there's a fundamental inareich between lifting at Tzimtzum and Acharat Tzimtzum. So he says, even according to the Rizal, after there was a Tzimtzum, there was a slapshus of Ein Sof. And this is slapshus of Ein Sof after the Tzimtzum makes it true. Dr. Bebchinas Bekelim the Chabad Atzilos. In Atzilos we give it Rambam. In Atzilos we say Huayadei and I do and mother. Achlila malim atzilus. We're not higher than atzilus. Because higher than atzilus is Ein Sof. What the Rambam is saying is true. Hashem is the Netzim of Seichel. In atzilus is Chochmah. But higher than atzilus is Chochmah. There's even Ein Sof. We don't agree with the Rambam. But when the Rambam isn't wrong, the Rambam is simply speaking only about atzilus, not higher than atzilus. Okay, because the Eibishter Ein Sof light is merum misnase is exalted and uplifted reim and Ein Kates infinite exaltedness from the essence and the madreg of Chabad. This is in Sharichat V'Amunah Periches Periktes. Until that the essence of Chabad Nechshavas is considered Kasiyah Gufnes Asiyah Barach, almost like physical Asiyah. The pasuk says Kulam B'Chachma Sisa. You know this statement that Kulam B'Chachma Sisa, that Chachma is like the Eibishter B'Kasiyah, is probably one of the most frequently quoted statements in Bad Alter Rebbe. He must say it 100 times. In between the Tanya and the Rebbe could say he's constantly saying this. And I suspect that he heard this, even though he never says it, I believe he heard this from his Rabbeim. That Lagabe de Eibishter, what's the title Kulam B'Chachma Sisa? Not only did he create everything with Chachma, but Lagabe de Eibishter Chachma is Kasiyah Gufnis. The Eibishter Chachma is nothing. But Lagabe Yossi, it's the highest thing here. So we agree with the Rambam in Atzilus that the Lakus is Chachma, but not higher than Atzilus. So we're not saying that the Rambam is correct. We're not saying that the Rambam is incorrect. We're saying that the Rambam is correct in Ishtalshalus. So in Ishtalshalus, and Neshama comes to Chachma Ilah. In higher than Ishtalshalus, and Neshama is a Chelik Al-Kamim Al-Mamish. In Ishtalshalus, and Neshama comes to Chachma Ilah. Stop. Now, according to what we just learned, every Neshama is a piece of God, and we should all be the same size. The question is, there are myriads of different divisions of levels in Neshamas Gavei Kates, higher and higher, that's an infinite level. For example, page 12. The great levels of the Neshamas of the Avis and Mesha Rabbeinu. And the Neshamas they say in Eila when compared to the souls of our generations. The Ikvi Mashiach, which were the heels of Mashiach. Mamish like heels. Compared to the brain and the head. So if all neshamas are chelik al-kamim mal, if all neshamas are chachmilah, how can you have such huge disparity? Every individual generation, there are souls of the heads of the thousands of Jews. The souls are a head and a brain. Compared to the souls of the population and the simple people. Moreover, forget about from generation to generation. Forget about in one person. You and yourself have different levels of neshama. You call a nefesh, every soul is klula, mi nefesh, ruach, and neshama. I think it's called ha-nefesh. It consists of nefesh, ruach, and neshama. So the kasha is, even in you there's different dimensions. If it's true, as we're arguing, that every neshama is a chelik alakam mimal mamish, if it's true that every neshama is a chelik alakam mimal mamish, how could there be all of these different levels? That's the kash. So you're right. There's talking differences. Now, stop for a moment. Why are there going to be differences? Because the neshama goes through Ishtalshalus. Even though it's true that the neshama is a chelik al mamish. And Yisrael Olav Machshav comes from Chachmi Ilah. And even the way it comes Lamata, it's still chelik al mamish, it's still Chachmi Yisrael Olav Machshav. At the same time, however, the way the neshama comes Lamata, it goes through Ishtalshalus. So the two things are true. A, every neshama is a chelik al mamish and Yisrael Olav Machshav. B, because of Ishtalshalus, there are differences between one neshama and the next. And this is the maila of the second point of the first point. Chelik al mamish, everyone is the same. Yisrael Olav Machshav is the beginning of Ishtalshalus. And it's a good thing. It's good that neshamas are Ishtalshalus. It's good that all neshamas are not the same. You know why? Because if all neshamas were the same, we would be a bunch of teus, a bunch of independent mitzias. The idea that there's difference between one neshama and the next, and there's a higher neshamas, lower neshamas, has to do what we call the hiskalalus of neshamas. Each neshama is not separate; neshamas are connected. So there's a maila actually in the fact that some neshamas are lower, some neshamas are higher, because we make up a koima achas, one complete body, which would not be true if we would all be in the state of chelik al mamish. Says the Rebbe, you're right, there are these differences. Become a nevertheless. The root of every nefesh ruach and neshama. Mereish kol hamadrega, that's safe called the from the highest level to the lowest level. Hamalubish, which is manifest, in the body of a simple person and a careless person. You should know that nimshach comes from the Eibishter's brain, which is, so to speak, the wisdom of the Eibishter. Stop. And what's the gedank? Everything comes from the Eibishter. right? This napkin, this soiled tissue, also comes from the Eibishter. In a Yid, it goes through a Hishtalshalos. There's higher levels and lower levels. Even after all the Hishtalshalos, it's still connected to the way it was in Chochmei. In other words, you could reveal his connectedness to Chochmei, even though he's descended so many levels. That's what makes a Yid Gedusha. Gedusha means he's still connected. As opposed to, in the Yom Hazeh, once it comes from a higher level to a lower level, it loses connection to the higher level. And he gives you the mashal to explain how we work this out. Every neshama comes from Chochmei, and there's so many differences. And he gives you the mashal to explain how a neshama can all be from Chochmei, we're all the same, and yet there's so many different types. Kemashal haben, for example, a son. The beginning of a child is the brain of the father, and the deepest level of the brain of the father. That you should know that every aspect of the child comes from the brain. The nails of his feet come from that original point. Now then, it has to pause and hesitate. 9 months in the mother's womb. And during that 9 months, it's not just sitting there dormant, but it's descending from step to step. L'ishtan is to change. Ulizhav is meant to create more fineness and detail. Till tzipanayim, until nails, says that Avim calls us still. Then as it continues to be tied and unified. In a wondrous and powerful union, in its original essence, which was the point which is from the brain of the father. Moreover, even now in this son, the nourishment of the nails and their vitality comes from the brain and the head of the child. Yeah, you give chayis to your toenails from your chokhmah, but your chokhmah comes from your father's chokhmah, so your father is still sustaining your toenails. The Gemara says Nida. The Gemara discusses what the father gives and what the mother gives, and basically the Gemara says anything which is loivin, which is why it comes from the father, the bones and the veins and the nails come from the father, and the mother gives the blood and the meat, anything that's red. As it's written in Kabbalah, the kinds of garments that just even in Chumash, that he had like scales on his body which were like nails. And al pi Kabbalah it comes from the brain of Tvuna, which is a madrege in Bina. The point is that the periphery, the dermis, the outside layer of Adam Rishon comes from the Me'achav. Now, the chap is two things. First of all, it comes from the Me'achav, and the second of all, it continues to be connected, right? So the neshamas all come from one place. And then they split up and they diversify and they become many, many neshamas, right? So there's higher neshamas and lower neshamas, and every neshama is a chelik al mamash. You have to think of it like a pyramid. On the top of the pyramid there's only one. And as you go down, it splits more and more and more till you have millions. That's why there are fewer tzaddikim and so many more prasta, simple neshamas, because it's lower madrege. Right? And the diok is we're all connected. We're all distinct. Each one of us is a chelik al mamash, and we're all connected. Let me give it to you in these words. Imagine Adam had not eaten meitzadas tevara. Or imagine Yaakov Avinu had negotiated settlement with Esav right then and there in Pashas Vayishlach. What would happen to us? Mashiach would come, yeah? We would never be created. But it wouldn't be the pshat, we wouldn't be there. We'd be there. We'd be part of the Chochmei law of some bigger neshama. Over the course of history, lower and lower neshamas come from higher and higher neshamas. The Chochmei law of the higher neshama, which is connected to the Chochmei law of Atmos Musa and Sav Baruch Hu, creates a lower neshama. Once we're created, we exist. And now that we exist, in loss of love, in Elam Haba, the place, we're going to be a distinct, separate neshama with our own connection to Chochmei law. In other words, we're going to have our own chelik mamish. But it was nishtashel, it comes through a higher madrege of a neshama, and therefore two things are true. Number one, every neshama is a metzias b'fnei atzmi, a separate entity. Every neshama has its own chelik mamish. Number two, we're all one, and the chelik mamish really is the same chelik. It comes from the same shadish. And the splitting up, the diversification of the neshamas is a process of hishtalshalus, to create higher neshamas and lower neshamas. Why? Because we have different functions. You can't have a body with only heads. A body with only heads can't do nothing. You have to have hands and feet, and toes, and nails, and hair, and skin. And different neshamas fill different roles. And the diok is, im kol zeh, then ukshurum yechades ba'atmas mos me'echav. We're still one with the chelik hachanam. The simple way to say it is, in hishtalshalus normally, when you go from a higher level to a lower level, you're no longer connected to your higher level. And the shama comes from a higher level to a lower level, and it becomes the lower level, it's still connected to the higher level. And the Alter Rebbe continues, the same is true in the Nimshal. What we read the last 8 lines was a mashal from a child from his father. That it starts out from a single point, and even though the child develops into so many parts, it's still connected to that point. Now was the Nimshal. In the root of every aspect of each of the 3, Nefesh, Ruach, and Neshama, shall call Yisrael a mile of the Jewish people as a whole. As it descends from level to level of the Ishtal with the chain reaction of worlds. Atzilus, Bria, Yitzira, Asir. That the beginning of this is Mechachmasi, is Baruch Atach Mechachmei Allah, Chachmat Atzilus. Kislev, as we already said earlier, Kulam B'Chachmasi, it all starts with Chachmei Allah, Hishtashlos, Asir. Begins with Chachmei Allah, and then it creates the next world, and the next world, and the next world, the next level, the next level, the next level, and so forth, till on the very, very bottom, this Hav and Mimena is created through that chain reaction of worlds, Nefesh, Ruach, and Neshama. The different aspects of the soul, Shalom Ya'aretz, of simple people, of course, Yerach, people are so-called little worth. But the Chapi is the Imkos, they nevertheless, Identity, they are continued to be. Kshureis of Yuchad is tied and one, unified. B'Yuchad Nifla v'Yatzim, in a wondrous and an intense union. B'Mehusan v'Atzmus, in the original essence. Shi'am Shach is Chachmei, which is, so to speak, the Chachmei of the Eibishter. Okay, stop. And again, the point is that this is the distinction of a neshama. That neshamas descend from higher levels to lower levels, and even after they've descended to the lower levels, they're still connected. Right? The nursing and vitality of the souls of Am Ya'aretz, the lowest people. From the neshamas, of the righteous men and the wise men, who are Roshei B'nei Yisrael, the heads of the Jewish people. Of course, Roshei B'nei Yisrael, the Rosh Tevis Rebbe, Shabbadedim of their respective generations. So just like a father gives the child 1 point, and the whole child comes from that point. Of course, that point is much edeler, is much edeler than the child. That point is Atzmus of the Chochmah. The child is a bunch of different pieces. Every single aspect of the child continues to be connected to this point. The same is true by Yidden. We go through a Hishtalshalos, like everything else does, but we're Kedusha. And because Yidden are Kedusha, we continue to be connected to this point, which is Chachmei Allah, and on the highest Madreges, it's Atzmus Hus, it's Chelek HaMimal Mamash. Now, the key Nekuda here is that the Eibishter makes us different, right? And He makes us come from one another. Hashem didn't just make, according to Kabbalah, there's 360 billion sparks, 600,000 root neshamas. Each root has 600,000 sparks. 600,000 of 600,000 is 360 billion sparks. It's not the pshat Hashem creates 360 sparks. Hashem creates one Chachmei Allah. And that Chachmei Allah splits more and more until there's a possibility for 360 sparks. Now I'm asking you, do you think that there have been 360 billion Jewish people who lived in this world since Shesh Me'Bereishis? I highly doubt it. There have been many fetuses who were aborted, babies who were never even born. They were stillborn or very early in pregnancies. You have babies who die shortly after birth. You have all kinds of situations. If you add all of those, you'll get an enormous number. And even then you won't get 360 billion in the Astacht. The pshat is there's this many possibilities. Every child that's born is the actualization of the, it's bringing down one more spark, that it shouldn't just be a piece of moyachav, but it should become a metzias b'fnei atzma. But all of these neshamas, as they become a metzias b'fnei atzma, are still connected, right? And we all fill different roles. Every generation is a body. The collective history of the Jewish people is a body. Every neshama that's actually created, if Mashiach would come yesterday, a few neshamas wouldn't be born. They wouldn't have a chelek in Olam Haba. But they would. But they would as part of the moyach ha'av of a greater neshama. You understand? This is the pshat. And Rashi says, Hashem has a treasury l'mayla called guf. And the neshamas are there. And when all neshamas come down into this world, this is when Mashiach comes.
Mashiach comes also like Mashiach comes to be told also.
That's the thing, Akash. It's alumnus. It's not for this moment. But the point is, every neshama that's born is the creation of a new Metzias. Because before it was simply a spark in the father's neshama. Now it's its own Metzias. Maybe on a lower level, it's a new Metzias. A new servant of Hashem. A new shtickle atmos, which exists. And once it exists forever. The Rebbe writes that a baby that's born, and you do a bris milah, has tchias hamesa, and he dies immediately thereafter, has tchias hamesa. So you have every baby that actually develops is a new creation of a new Metzias. On the other hand, we're all connected to the oneness. What's called in Kabbalah Adam Harishan. Chachmei Allah is Adam Harishan. And then it's 7 is the Ushpizen. It splits up till you have all these billions of neshamas. But we all come from one source. So on the one hand, every neshama is created as a new Metzias. On the other hand, even though we become new Metzias, the Eibishter made that we should come from one another. Instead of making us separate. Because he wants there should be a union, a pneumistic union to Vishen Yidden, what we call a hiskalalus. Every neshama needs every other neshama. We complement one another. And the Kislev Arizal, you should know, says, the Kislev Arizal says it's brought in Mitzvah Avos Yisrael and Derech Mitzvah, which is based on this Pedic. And of course on Pedic Lamed Beis. That Arizal says, that why do you have to say Areinu Makabel in the morning? Why is Areinu Makabel in the morning? You know what the answer is? Because when you bring a carbon, the carbon has to be Tamim Yileras, and the carbon has to be whole. And if a carbon is a Baal Mum, it's possible. If you hate one Jew, you hate a piece of yourself. Because we're all connected. And if you hate another Jew, and you hate a piece in yourself, your tefillah is not going to be neskabel l'mayla, it's not shalom. So it's nachan leimer kedem at tefillah. Harini mekabel alai mitzvah saseish v'af kamoicha for you. I think the Rebbe has a different pshat. But as they state the Kislev Arizal, because if you don't have a shleimus deka achas for every yid, your tefillah is not going to be neskabel l'mayla. So the idea is we're all chelek ramim al mamish. At the same time, we're all different, but we're all connected. And the beginning of this connection is the tzaddikim and the chachamim, Rosh Hashanah Yisrael Shabbat. Because this is how the Eibishter makes us bepnimius interdependent. Every Jew is the other Jew. And it also explains the role of tzaddikim. The Gemara says, and the Rebbe explains it, the explanation of the Gemara, on the Pasuk L'Odavkebe, that the halacha is, it's a mitzvah saseh, as he passes the Rambam. Shekal Dalvik with Talmidei Chachamim, you have to connect it to Talmidei Chachamim. And my law of Kosev, the Torah considers it, Kil Nidbak B'Shchina Mamash, as though you connect yourself to the Shchina Mamash. Why? And the Torah is very poshut, because the Chacham is closer to Chachmei law. The Tzaddik is closer to Chachmei law. And your Neshama Mamash comes as a spark from his. And since your Neshama comes as a spark from his, when you're connected to him, you're connected to his Shadish as well. When we attach ourselves to the Tzaddikim, to the Rabbeim, to the Nesi Yisrael, Kshureis, we attach Nefesh, Ruach, and Neshama Shalami Ya'aretz, the souls of even Amaratz, Yechades, they become unified with Mehusa and Arishan in their first essence. V'shashim in their root. Shabei Chachmei Allah, and Chachmei Allah, Shu Yizbareh, Chachmasa Yechad, V'amad V'chuli, as we said on page Hey, near the bottom of the page, the Rambam. Chachmei Allah is the Eibishter Mamish, and Kabbalah agrees with the Rambam. And Chachmei Allah is the Eibishter in Atzilus, right? The Rambam says Chachmei Allah is Atzilus, is the Eibishter. We say Lechachmei HaKabbalah, we say that Tzimtzum, that the Ribi Shtachas they didn't save until the Slavish Bechinas HaChachma. This is also the Eibishter, so to speak. And when a Yid is connected to a Talmud Chacham, because his neshama is a spark from the neshama of Talmud Chacham, which creates this notion called his skalos, interdependence, and function of Klal Yisrael. Therefore, tzaddikim are so important, not just bechitzonius, because they give us counsel and guidance and data, but bepnimius, our neshamas come from them, and through them, we have a connection to Atzal Tzamos. The Rebbe says in the Sichos that we get all of our hashpah from the Rebbe the Nasi Adar, from the head of the generation. Not just our ruchniistic hashpahs, our parnasa, our gashmiistic hashpahs also. Like the Gemara says about the B'chanina ben Deiseh, that the whole world has parnasa because of B'chanina ben Deiseh, and B'chanina ben Deiseh was eating garden carob, Michael Behemoth. And a very small quantity of it also. Because he was Ein Klali, his neshama was a neshama close, and our neshamas are sparks from his neshama. This is not patronism, such make us dependent upon the tzaddik. It makes all Yidden one. And it explains why it's so important to listen to the tzaddik, to the Nasi Hadar. What about V'apeshim u'meridim v'tamidei chachamim, those who sin? And Rebbeinu Gad Talmud Chacham says, Alter Rebbe, tough luck. Yenikas nefesh yoch neshama shalahem. Their nefesh yoch neshama also was sustained by the tzaddik. Since they're turning their back, they're rebelling against Talmud Chacham, they can't get Begilif in the Talmud Chacham because they're defying the Talmud Chacham. So they get Behelef in the Talmud Chacham, which is called Acharayim. So all Neshamis come from Chachmei Allah. Period. All Neshamas, doesn't matter how low you go, it's the same source, because the Neshama is Alakut, always connected to its source. The chain goes through the Rebbe, the Nasi Adar, through the Talmidei Chachamim, the head of the generation. What about parents? So the Gemara says that there's 3 shutfim, right? The father gives the white, the mother gives the red, and the Eibush is matal by neshama. But in Kabbalah it says different. And this is a kasha. Mashkos Obazeir and Zeir it says, Obazeir Chodesh. Sheikh told the most important thing in bringing down a neshama, not in giving the loivin and the oidim. The father gives the loivin, the mother gives the oidim. But in bringing down the neshama, told that the kiddush the holiness of parents, what we call taras hamishpacha, creates taras in the children. Mashenk and the amaras v'chuli, but they don't have the right kavanas. In fact, Alter Rebbe don't understand. The father gives the oidim, the life. The mother gives the oidim. HaKadosh Baruch Hu matal ben neshama. How come the Zayah says that the neshama has to do with parents? The neshama is the Eibishter's choice. The Eibishter picks which neshama. It comes directly from Matzah Musamus. So what does it do with the parents? And for the Alter Rebbe. Number one, Hainu Mishum, the answer is, She'ein loch ha-nefesh yeruch ha-neshama. Every single neshama she'ein lo-lavush. The neshama has garments. And the garments are minefesh, the atmos of from the soul, that is the essence of the father and the mother. Your neshama, what kind of neshama you going to come from the Eibishter? If the Eibishter wants, parents who are the most lowly people can have a neshama datzilas too. It's Eibishter's geschäft. But the neshama has garments. Without those garments, the neshama has no connection to the guf. Those garments are connected to parents. V'chol ha-mitzvahs she'esa, your Yiddishkeit, hakal the Eisa Levush has to do with this garment v'choli. And therefore, if the garment is soiled and dirty and not transparent, it obstructs the neshama. Of course the neshama comes from the Eibishter. But the kiddush affects that the neshama should effectively be able to function. The Alter Rebbe had a chassid whose name was Isaac Homler, who to the day he died was a benyan. He never became a tzaddik. It says that the Alter Rebbe wanted to make him a tzaddik. He said, Isaac, come in mikveh chal derufei. Isaac, come to the mikveh, I'll pick you up. And he said to the Alter Rebbe, Michvel alein harvin, I want to work by myself. And he remained kol yom of a benyan. When he died, he was very old. And the last kuf of his life that he was weak, his body was not listening to him. So whenever he had Fabrenges, he would curse himself. In stark contrast to the Behillel Parach, who was much younger than he, but the Behillel was a tzaddik. It's a whole different thing. The Behillel was a tzaddik, Abizel was a benyan, the highest madrigas. So the story goes that Isaac Homer came to Alter Rebbe with a complaint. He says, Chassidim are mavatal. They make fun of me. The Bechal Chassidim were always mavatal. But some reason the Abizel was picked on more. The Abizel felt like he's getting a special treatment. So Alter Rebbe told him like this: you have a neshama of Atzilus. Now, in case you know what that means, I'll give you a little idea. Tanoim is the neshamas of Bria. Tanoim. Ameroim is the neshamas of Yitzira. Alter Rebbe says to one of his chassidim, you have a neshama of Atzilus, but the levushim are not good. In other words, of Isaac's parents, I'm sure they were wonderful Jews, but for a neshama of Atzilus, they were not qualified. So there's very thick, grobe levushim. Had the Eibishter gemacht, b'ashgacha pratis, chassidim should be mevatel you, to be mezachach your levushim, so your eir and neshama of Atzilus could be me'el amat. This is the pshat. Fa'afilu ha-shefa she'neisam hashmam, even the ashpah, the Eibishter of the person, sai beruchnius, and sai begashmius, of course it has to do with the Eibishter and do with neshamas, but the bottom line is, hakel haidei levush has to do with this garment. We make ourselves holy. Yamshech levush kadosh and nishmas b'nei. You bring down a holy garment, and the holier the garment, the finer the levushim, the easier it is for the Yiddishkeit to manifest in this world. The neshama is taka the Eibishter's geschäft, but the gilui and the functionality and the edelkeit of the gilui, the neshama has to do with the levushim. Fa'afili neshama gedela, the greatest neshama is tzrich l'kiddush ava v'chol. It needs a sanctity of parents, like I told you the story of the Isaac Homer. Aval neshama asma, when it comes to the neshama itself, I agree, says the Alter Rebbe. He knew the it happens that nishmas adam gavele in cats, the soul of a very high person. Ba comes li is to be b'nei the son shadim nivza v'shafol v'chuli, of a shameful and a lowly person. As written in Arizal, that it could happen that a great neshama should be born to simple parents, because the neshama is the Eibishter's choice. But I want you to know one more final nakuda, and that is that this idea that a great neshama should come to simple parents is a yetzim and a klal. It doesn't happen. But that a klal, great parents be a great neshama, simple parents be simple neshamas. But it's not the pshat you choose it. That's how the Eibishter chooses. Your choice is the levushim. The Eibishter choice is the neshama. Alter Rebbe says in Perek Yudches that the way it happens over here on top of page Chavdalat. Well, the Pam Mamshich and page Yisrael, the Neshama's Gevei is made. So we add 3 words. Page Chavdalat at the top. Shayob Imke Aklipis. The idea that simple parents have a great neshama, there's a kabbalistic explanation for why. If this great neshama is lost in klipa, so then it comes down to a pashut set of parents. But it's a yetzim in a klal. Ruba de ruba, bigger people have bigger neshamas, small people have children with smaller neshamas. But the neshama is taka the Eibishter's choice, and the parents give the levush. Calls that this entire pedic, including the chelik hakam mal mamish, and including the yisrael olav machshav, and including that any makabel, is belakutei the pashas vayeda or b'tami hamitzvos pashas bereshis. Okay.